as he saw it, even then, was rewiring our brains. The tools that we were using or starting to use even back then were defining and shaping our thinking. And if you think of something, for example, back then, one of the big things was search engines, particularly Google and Yahoo at one stage as well. I mean, how it actually has changed our thinking, how we access information. I mean, our memories don't have to be the same as they were. We everything is in our devices to a large extent. And the apps and devices, we don't really store too much in our own memories anymore, which is a bit of a problem. Because there are certain things like phone numbers at times that you might need that you can't remember and recall in an emergency. If you've lost your phone, for example, that's just one very simple example. Next, please, Asha. He made a very interesting comment and saying that many processes that we previously handled with, through learning theories, particularly in the cognitive domain, could now be offloaded to or supported by technology. And now we're seeing that to a great degree with artificial intelligence. A lot of these processes that we would normally have done, let's say manually to a certain degree, or even with the assistance of technology, is now becoming more and more automated and more interactive with things like artificial intelligence. So that was I think that he really had some foresight there. Next, please, Asha. Okay, and what he pointed to is that the know how and know what is great, but it needs to be supplemented with know where, and particularly as he saw it, the way technology was evolving in terms of particularly in the internet as such, and the connectivity provided by being able to link devices, link different types of software as it was back then, which was not as sophisticated as it is now. But he could see the possibilities of people being so connected in so many different ways and being connected to knowledge. Next, please, Asha. And this was his glimpse into the future in 2005. And these are they're not all of the points that he looked at in terms of his theory, but they're the ones that I think are relevant for the digital literacy side of things. Okay, particularly learning is a process of connecting specialized nodes or information sources, and the learning, as I've said, may reside in non-human appliances. And this is something I'm not going to go into too much detail now, that can be is known as distributed cognition. So our source of information, as I say, our memory to a large extent is now located in a number of different applications, devices, and so forth. It's also there's also the theory of extended mind, Andy Clark's theory of extended mind. How do we extend our mind out into all of these devices and apps and software, and how we use them, and how, again, that idea of it influencing us and us influencing, and particularly now in terms of AI, where we're training the AI, we are very much enmeshed with the technology in that way. There's also the idea of nurturing, maintaining connections to facilitate continual learning. These are more human connections, but they are also facilitated by the use of the technology. The ability to see connections between fields, ideas, and concepts is a core skill. We already have a lot of that, particularly with the critical cross-field outcomes and all sorts of things like that. That's one aspect of it in higher education. And then the idea of being current, being up to date, and keeping your knowledge up to date in a whole selection of realms, if I can put it that way, not just in terms of your professional work, but personally, study-wise, all these sorts of things. And then also choosing what to learn and the meaning of incoming information seen through the lens of shifting reality. And I think that is coming very true now in terms of artificial intelligence. Our reality is shifting on a daily basis in terms of what sort of information we can access, how we go about accessing, what we access it through, what is providing us with the information in terms of things like generative AI and so forth. This has already been quite a focus in terms of the developments in technology, but now with this critical moment, that has actually occurred in the last couple of years in terms of generative AI. That is really, and you can see here, he actually had quite a bit of foresight. He saw this coming, and I'm very disappointed that he didn't actually develop this more. In fact, at one stage, he criticized his own theory and said, oh, it was a load of rubbish. I don't know why, because I could see at the time, even though I was very much new to things like online learning and using technology for learning and teaching and so forth, I could see the logic of what he was saying. And I think it's unfortunate that more people didn't pay attention to what George Siemens was saying, about 20 odd years ago. Anyway, next, please, Asha. Now, what is digital literacy? We have a tendency to think of it, and we should not think of it, if you can click twice, Asha, please, as computer literacy. Next, yeah, computer literacy. It is not computer literacy. Computer literacy is a subset of what is now seen as digital literacy, because things have become so complex, so interlinked, so entangled. The technology itself, the devices, the apps, software, and so forth. It is not computer literacy. Like, let's say about 20 years ago, even when George Siemens was going, developing his theory, was very, very much focused only on the use of devices, the proficient use of devices, applications, and so forth. But now it's a much, much wider field, and there are far more, as he would probably like to call it, nodes involved in terms of digital literacy. Next, please, Asha. This is how we picture computer literacy. Like, for example, the first year experience computer literacy training. Now, I'm not criticizing that. It's a very necessary component of the student's experience when they first arrive at the university. They have to be, orientated to the technology we're going to use in many different areas. It's not just in terms of Ulwazi. That's the one I obviously think of as a teaching and learning person. I'm looking at the different types of educational technology. I mean, everything now can be regarded, but I'm saying in terms, yes, obviously they need to know how to use the different platforms and so forth. But it goes so far beyond this, and unfortunately, this is often where it stops. It stops with that basic computer training, the computer lab training. This is where it actually stops. But as we go through this, you will see it's a much, much wider field than just putting the students into these computer labs and orientating. But as I say, I'm not criticizing it. It's a very necessary part. It's a very foundational part of what we're going to look at. Next, please, Asha. There are two digital literacy frameworks available. There is the JISC, which is Joint Information Systems Committee in the UK, and the one that I consider the best one for use in higher education. There is another one that looks at it from a slightly different angle, which is ISTE, which is the International Society for Technology and Education, based in the United States. But they are more focused on, based in the primary education, higher, like secondary education, and so forth. That's more of their focus. They have the stuff that they pinpoint is just as relevant. But for our purposes, JISC, if you can click next, please. JISC, the JISC framework is the one that I've always, for me, is the gold standard in terms of higher education. Next slide, please, Asha. Okay, what is digital literacy? Let's just look at a couple of general definitions. Now, this is the classic JISC one. And what they look at is things like going beyond, I'm not going to read it. I mean, you can read the slide. I'm not going to read it to you. Going beyond functional IT skills. That is the crux of the matter. Going beyond those functional IT skills, beyond the skills that the students initially learn in first year experience type of settings with the computer labs, and perhaps going a little beyond that. You would need to go beyond that. What it means, as I say, to be digitally literate is that things are constantly changing over time and across contexts. And that's how one has to start thinking about it. It's not just a case of that functional approach. It's also changing over time throughout different contexts. There's a lot of change in terms of technology and so forth. And then what the students need to develop is that set of academic and professional situated practices supported by diverse and changing technologies. Now, I know I'm to logic speaking to people in health sciences. And I think that's something that actually comes more naturally in the health sciences because of the dependency on so many different, particularly now, sophisticated types of technology that, used for diagnostic purposes and so forth. So I think health sciences is a wonderful place to start with this sort of thing, because you already, to a certain extent, it's an innate thing. Now that students need to use a range of technologies, but there are other skills that they maybe are lacking in terms of academically speaking and using technology in a general sense for academic purposes. But we'll look at that as we go along through the series of presentations, not just today. Next slide, please. Interestingly, I asked Microsoft Copilot, which is dependent on ChatGPT for Omni, for its definition of digital literacy, and it came up with some quite interesting points. It pinpointed, for example, the technical and cognitive abilities that you need to use, and I think that's a very important point. It's that being able to span different contexts, and devices, and do this cognitively. I think that's a very important point. But one thing to also emphasize, and I like the fact that it pulled this, I think it pulled this from Wikipedia, if I remember correctly, that it doesn't necessarily replace traditional methods of interpreting information. The human element is always necessary. Even the AI we have now is not competent enough to do that. It cannot do that in the way, in the unique way that a human being can do it. So I want to emphasize this is not about technology is great and we've all got to be dominated by it and, you know, be entangled with it and all the rest of it. There is that aspect of it not replacing the traditional methods of interpreting information and human intuition and the uniqueness of interpreting that information. But it extends the foundational skills, you know, it extends those skills into different areas, into different environments, spaces, virtual spaces, and so forth. And one thing that it emphasized, and this will come across again in the JISC framework, is the confident and critical use of all of the different types of digital technologies for, you know, for different types of purposes, you know, information literacy, communication, problem solving, and so forth. Next slide, please, Asha. Okay, this is one of the things that really, you know, initially I was like with George Siemens, and this came out around about the same time that I got involved in educational technology. And I was quite excited about this initially about 20 years ago. I thought this was, yes, that's right, you know, digital natives, you know, young people, you know, really know how to use technology and so forth. And, you know, he says here that they are all native speakers of the digital language of computers, video games, and the internet. And as I say, this was about over 20 years ago. And I think we've come to realize that that is not the case, particularly in education. We seem to think that those sort of skills, yes, the students, many of the students do have those skills, particularly in terms these days of, you know, social media and things like that, video games and so forth. But that does not translate into the educational environment, as I think many of us have found. That, you know, you need to be able to use it for a specific purpose, particularly in the academic environment. And then, of course, teachers, or anybody who was older than the sort of students he was thinking about at that time, well, unfortunately, those of us who are older were obviously not born into that digital world and didn't have all these, you know, they weren't nurtured on all of this technology and, of course, became digital immigrants. Those were the two terms he used. But that digital native myth is really, it's done a lot of damage in terms of online teaching and learning, because, you know, it was very trendy at the time and that phrase stuck, but unfortunately it's not something that was that is a reflection of reality. The students are not digital natives. I mean, there are all sorts of other aspects of Mark Prensky I can go into, in that he was focused on a specific level of society, a specific country, specific, you know, but even in that context, he was incorrect, as has been proved afterwards. Anyway, next slide, please, Asha. Oh, in fact, that's how I feel. That is actually how, I forgot I had that animation there, but that's how I currently feel about the digital native myth. Next slide, please, Asha. Okay, now we're going to have a look at the different aspects of the digital literacy framework. So the first one, if you can click the next thing, please, that's computer literacy. That digital proficiency and productivity is computer literacy, what we tend to think of as computer literacy, but as you'll see, it goes a bit beyond what we were thinking of. The next, please. And that is basically that, particularly that emphasis again on confident use of things like email, you know, webcams, web surfing, even things like Teams and stuff like that. And again, choosing correct hardware and software for a task, the ability to be able to troubleshoot, which is very, very important, basic tech issues. And again, that idea of staying up to date with, you know, all the latest developments in technology and so forth, and particularly in a particular field, and particularly for our purposes in different academic fields. Next, please, Asha. Okay, next is information, data, and media literacies. In this respect, you know, it's the collection, curation, organization, and sharing of data in a range of formats, which is very important, that ability to use technology to actually display information, or, you know, communicate, you know, in different, and as I say, in a range of formats. Also the interpretation of data using digital tools. And then, of course, you will think of things, you know, the different types of things, like I think it's SPSS and things like that, the different types of tools we can use particularly in research, for analysis. And then there's digital research methods, you know, in terms of how, you know, extracting information from, let's say, for example, the library the databases that we have, you know, that are supplied, we have connection to with the library. And then importantly, the understanding of copyright law, you know, intellectual property and things like that. Next, please, Asha. Okay, then we go more into what's, we tend to think more along these lines of digital creation, the problem solving and innovation, although problem solving innovation doesn't always come into it. And for a long time, it was just a focus on the media. So it is the creation of different types of digital artifacts, different formats, text, images, video, blogs, wikis, PowerPoints, whatever it might be, but also solving problems, in ways of, communicating information to people, what is the best way and so forth, in terms of the, problem solving with, and that of course also goes in terms of diagnostic tools, medicine, that is a very natural fit there. Next, please, Asha. Okay, then we have digital communication, collaboration, and participation. And this is often something that students, for some reason, I don't know why, and in fact, people in general tend to battle with sometimes in terms of things like Teams and Zoom. Also creating collaborative documents, that not so much, but I do find Teams and Zoom. In fact, I've recently had feedback, from another area of the university, where students who are actually doing something that involves digital, platforms are concerned about showing their faces on Teams, and that I find odd. So this is still very much a challenge in terms of orientating people to the virtual space, and and making them comfortable in the virtual space, and making them comfortable with the use of the virtual space. So that's one thing that I've, interestingly enough, coincidentally has come up very, very recently in my own practice. Okay, as I say, also creating collaborative documents, and then creating personal digital networks for learning, and also, for just in general, how we go about, creating those networks. Next, please, Asha. And then something we don't often think of, although I think AI has put a spotlight on this one: digital identity and well-being. So what sort of identity are you creating in the online environment? Well, how are you being presented in the online environment? Like, sort of LinkedIn profiles, your Facebook profile, any sort of professional, even academia.edu. I think it's that, those sort of platforms, those academic platforms where you put your work up, even things like Google Scholar, things like that. And then, of course, the privacy issues, and that has become a big thing now with, as I say, AI. And you're going to hear me saying AI, ad nauseum, unfortunately, but it is something that has really put a spotlight on all of this. And netiquette, to a certain degree, netiquette, I think, is a little bit of an outdated concept. I think a lot of people are more aware of netiquette, but especially for beginners, netiquette is still something that people need to be able to understand how to behave towards others, and create a safe environment in the online space. Okay, next, please. And then finally, what they look at is digital learning and development, and that goes into digital teaching and digital learning. And I must say, JISC updated this framework very, very recently, and they really have done a very good job of it. It is far more incisive in a way. It's looking at more and more of the aspects, because more and more aspects are coming, to the fore as the more complex the technology becomes, and the need to be able to move across platforms and different types of software and so forth. Okay, next, please. Okay, what we're going to look at now in this particular session is what the digital proficiency and productivity aspects of this framework. And it's actually quite incredible. As I say, we tend to think this is the computer literacy aspect, but what actually goes into this, particularly across the time period of a degree, is interesting. Next, please, Asha. Okay, again, this is what we view as computer literacy. Next, please. First of all, digital proficiency. What is that in terms of what we want the students to be able to do? So that's ability to use the devices, as I've said, the networks, applications, and now these days AI software, and all the different services that are provided, all the different types of platforms. Again, there is that emphasis on the confident adoption of these devices and applications, and the capacity to stay up to date. But the understanding of basic concepts, now this is becoming more and more important: encoding and information processing. The algorithmic, especially thinking about algorithms in terms of, the AI, how AI actually does this, how they actually, how it actually forms. They're having that background information in terms of AI. And then again, also understanding of the accessibility, how different people are able to access information in terms of perhaps disabilities, but also in terms of how many people have access to digital devices, and so forth. The different levels, the inclusion. In what ways does technology exclude and include, and so forth, and of course that brings in equity issues into the picture. Next, please, Asha. Okay, and then the second aspect, the digital productivity. The ability to use your digital skills, the digital skills you have, to accomplish different tasks. choosing, and this is important, choosing the right devices, applications, software, and systems, the ability to assess the benefits and constraints. And then that, of course, it speaks to the proficiency, the accessibility and inclusion and so forth. The ability to, and this is particularly important, to adopt and adapt digital tools, finding different uses, perhaps innovative uses at times, slightly, making a plan, with something to perhaps present it differently, format it differently, whatever it might be. But the ability to work fluently across a range of digital tools and applications. And I have heard a particular phrase used over the years, and I think it's quite a good, the idea of digital literacy, but I think there's also the idea more, for me, it's always the idea of digital fluency, that ability to move, in and through and around technology fluently and comfortably, particularly. Because what I've found in my 20 years, in educational technology, is people find technology to be a barrier. And it's something that I have found that it has, to me, doesn't seem currently to have a solution. I still find that barrier aspect in the technology, particularly in educational technology. It seems almost like it's an alien space for people. It's something that is there's a disjunct between users and the technology, and the ability to move through it, and with, and the use of it, the comfortable and fluent use of it. That is something that I do want to highlight. It's that, and I would appreciate, hearing what people feel would make it easier for people and how they experience technology. But we can do that a little bit later on. And then again, understanding how digital technology is changing our practices in all areas of life. So I say one fundamental thing I've found myself through the years is the fact that I don't use my memory as much as I used to. A lot of my information resides in a device. I mean, Google, of course, has always been in there, at the touch of a button. And now, of course, we have AI. And I'm finding myself becoming less and less dependent on my own memory. This is just one small aspect of it. I mean, even reading. I spend, I won't say a huge amount of time, but I do get some of my information, for example, on X, which was, of course, formerly Twitter, and even Facebook. Everything is in tiny little sound bites. On many platforms, people don't want to read large paragraphs and large, in fact, things like journal articles. We're now asking AI to summarize journal articles and do all sorts of weird and wonderful things with the academic literature, which is great. I think that, I'm very excited about it on the one hand, but on the other hand, we are becoming more and more dependent on these things. And what is happening to our own ability to think, to criticize, to think critically, things like that. That is one thing that does concern me. But these are things these are the sort of skills that one has to develop. Next, please, Asha. I'm going to let's look more deeply now into what JISC sees as a progression through a student's degree. Next, please, Asha. The basic skills in terms of proficiency, just the general use of devices, logging into networks, using basic functions, text editing, using a PowerPoint, for presentation, spreadsheets, but very basic use, image editing and so forth. Technology failures, there's that aspect of troubleshooting, being able to troubleshoot any problems they may encounter, even if it is knowing where to actually, how to contact the help desk, for example. Those are the sort of things. But ultimately, obviously, one wants some things to be, the students to be able to actually solve some problems. Obviously, being able to use the web browser and search engine, very, important in terms of, first of all, I would say, accessing a lot of our platforms in the university. And then moving through the degree. Next piece, Arshad, as you move further, the students move through the degree, they obviously have to make use of university platforms, particularly in terms of course participation, being able to submit assignments, quizzes, so forth, and access other content. Using, the use of special digital devices, specialist software, and of course that is very relevant, I know, in the health sciences, to be able to, and this is where I think, you're very lucky in the health sciences. Also, the idea of managing personal security and privacy settings. We've had very practical examples of this in some of the computer labs, for example, in some of the schools, where students have forgotten to log out, and then what has happened is another group of students has come in to do a quiz, and they've been logged in on that particular student's login details, so they've taken the quiz as that particular student. So it sounds like such a simple thing, but that is how those are the sort of things that one has to look at. And then also being able to recognize the limits of their digital skills and know where and how to get help with how do I skill myself up on a specific aspect. And that, in fact, is also is more also a cognitive thing. It's like being able to know where to get the resources, and what level you're at. It's really a reflective thing as well. And finally, at the end of the degree, in terms of proficiency, next please, Arshad. You're obviously going to be able to use those devices and applications and so forth that are relevant to your profession, or even in our case, the scholarly context. So it can be or the professional or scholarly context. And then being able to use the advanced functions of productivity software as Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and so forth. For instance, track changes in Word, things like that. Create nice looking, attractive PowerPoints, engaging PowerPoints. Using Excel to the degree that you should be able to. And then obviously adopting new devices, applications, and so forth, and then understanding the basic concepts in computing, coding, algorithms, and so forth, data that are relevant to your specific profession. And at that point, the student really should be fluent in the use of all of these things. It shouldn't just be a sort of basic, lower layer of being able to do these things. They should be fluent, particularly, I'm sure, and yes, obviously in health sciences. Next, please, Asha. Okay, looking at digital productivity for students. Next, yeah, basic skills. Again, now here we go into things like managing your passwords and files, managing their calendar, an online calendar, particularly things like Outlook, even Google Calendar, locating files in the cloud and being able to use upload, download, and locating them, as I say as well, adapting their devices and software to their own personal preferences, so configuring them for their own personal needs, particularly, whether that be professional needs, eventually, or their own private needs, things like that. And then knowing what kind of this is important, particularly now with generative AI, what sort of use is being made of the data that they're supplying to online platforms and services. This is something that is really becoming important. Next, please, Asha. And in terms of going through the degree, looking at the value of a digital tool or application for a specific task, content, or context, is this the correct tool for use? Obviously, in health sciences, there are specific tools for specific reasons. You're using them for specific reasons. But in general, things like the use of Word or Excel or whatever it might be, or some sort of application to present figures, data, and so forth. Isn't this the right tool? Also, in terms of the subject specialist tasks, being able to work across a range of devices, applications, and screens, in order to be able to get a job done. That multitasking aspect, which is very important in terms of, accessing the technology. And then obviously managing a range of content, course materials, notes, etc., things like EndNote, Mendeley, Zotero, that sort of stuff. That is one particular area I have found in my own personal experience where students are lacking. And I know I'm the people here will know what I am talking about. I mean, I always quote this example where I was doing an OER, an open educational resource presentation, to 5 master's students and 1 PhD student. And we came to, going into retrieving information. And I found out that the 5 master's students had never used, and this was at WITS, had never used the databases provided by the library, the access to the databases. And they did not know. The PhD student did, but the 5 master's students had no clue about retrieving journal articles, different types of texts and so forth using the databases, which I found very scary. I actually found that very scary. So that is something where that is an area that really does need to be addressed. And then, of course, using versioning, document history, web history, whatever it might be, track changes, and so those sort of features. That's the sort of productivity level as they move through. And then, of course, towards the end, very similar to the proficiency. Next, please, Asha. The adoption, adaptation, and and updating of devices, and applications with the help of this. It doesn't have to be. You would like the person to be fluent in it and be comfortable in it, but you could. This is also with the help of guides, help menus, help desks, whatever it might be that you would need to address these sort of things. Finding solutions and workarounds for problems in terms of technology, and even problems that you maybe be able to solve them with technology. Again, the management of data privacy and security, both within an organization and for their own personal, private, reasons or means or whatever it is. This is something that is becoming, as I've emphasized with regard to generative AI and the openness of these platforms, and you have no idea what is being used, what data is being used, your name, the actual data you supply, particularly in terms of research. You have to be very, very careful with this. But in terms of your own personal information, any sort of information that you feel particularly is unique or innovative, unless it has, as we have here at WITS, we are able to use Microsoft Copilot. If we use our sign-in, our university sign-in to Copilot, then our data is protected. It's not retained. That's why you will never be able to bring up a history of what the conversation, which is there's a bit of a downside to this. Obviously, you have to copy and paste everything, because you will not be presented with the previous history of your conversation with Copilot, because it is the moment it has generated it, and it doesn't keep it anywhere. It generates it for you in that instance, and then it erases it. So, but these other platforms where especially ChatGPT, the free version, and all those sort of things, or even within the paid version, I think there's some issues. I don't want to speak to to that, because my information on that is not that clear at the moment. But I just would say be wary of any of these things where you're putting in very personal data or research or whatever it might be, because it can be used. You don't know where else it's you're training these bots. You're actually training the language learning model in the background, and your data has been used to train it, so it'll spew it out quite, you don't know where it's going to spew it out next to somebody else, and have it entangled in somebody else's data. But especially if you've got something that you don't want to be made public, I would rather not do that. Okay, and another thing, managing the projects using digital tools, and also very importantly, being able to support others with the digital skills, to be able to transfer your skills, to have a level of not only proficiency, but in terms of productivity, the productivity tools used to be able to actually transfer those skills to others. And I think this is particularly important in our academic environment, of being able to transfer these skills to students. You will do it in the health sciences, obviously, as a matter of course, because you are using technology all the time. But these are, I think, in the JISC framework, particularly what we're going to be looking at in this series is the more general academic uses of technology, in terms of using the different types of apps that students can use, in terms of social, like communication, WhatsApp, the issues around WhatsApp, Word, how to to actually make use of presenting, actually using it to present information. And in fact, this sort of thing is very, very strongly tied with academic literacy. A lot of this sort of stuff is very much, you can't really separate out digital literacy and academic literacy. And we will be looking at that as we go forward. It's how this, the digital literacy and academic literacy are now becoming more and more enmeshed with each other. Okay, next please, Asha. Okay, we obviously can't, I'm not going to use Mentimeter, as I've said, because I would need to actually display the results to you, which is a little bit difficult. I know you would be able to see it, but it's much better to be able to do it as part of the presentation. So would you say, after what I've presented to you, that your students are currently digitally proficient or productive, in terms of what the JISC framework describes? Would you say that we have students that are digitally proficient or productive? You can answer in the chat, or you can activate your mic. I see you've said partially, Shreya. I agree with you, partially. Yes, in some aspects. I would say particularly, as I've said again and again during this presentation, in health sciences, I think the students in health sciences are probably more digitally literate than they would be in certain other areas of the university. I agree with that.
So, Fiona, yeah, I actually think you're overstating that. I think our students skid by, and they do what they have to. And sometimes they waste a lot of time trying to do the things they need to do because they don't really know how to do them properly.
Okay.
I don't know if people agree with me.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's my general experience too. In a wider sense, is that they do the basic, what's basically needed, and then even sometimes it's not that there isn't that fluency and proficiency that there should be. That's my experience.
And I mean, the question is, we don't spend time giving them the opportunity to do that. We just give them the task with the digital literacy in the background, assuming they know how to do it, and we're much more interested in the task.
That is the challenge. It's that whole digital native myth, you know, that they are able to do these things, and the reality is that the students are not as clued up as we think they are. We, as you say, we just assign them a task and say, go and do this, and many of them, if not most of them, will not have a clue how to actually use the software to complete the task, or even think of using a specific type of software to you know, this is what is really quite concerning. If you can go to the next slide, please, Asha. And this is where the optimal approach is to integrate these digital skills into the curriculum and to give the students activities that will integrate the technology in a thoughtful way, in a way that speaks to the use of the technology within the particular context, that situatedness of the use of the technology in a particular context. So that is something that I think we still need, and it's not just South Africa, it's everywhere. That's something that still needs to be worked on, that really needs to actually really come into curriculum development. I don't know what you feel, Shura. I think that there's not enough thought around, you know, encouraging the use of the various technologies, and I'm not talking about just for the sake of it in a particular subject. It's things that the students, as we've seen from what I presented, that they will need to be able to do in the workplace. And this is what also is a great concern for me. I don't know about you, Shura. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I agree with you completely. I think that people don't start a health science degree thinking about the workplace. And then they start thinking a little bit about the workplace when they do work integrated learning and they're out there interacting with not only patients, but the system and the hierarchies, and then the actual physical environment.
Yes.
Which is not very supportive. I mean, I don't know if you know, Fiona, but we still do not have every single one of our extended training sites powered by Wits Wi-Fi. So you can't link classes and you can't send them work to do unless it's done in advance and they know and they download and they take it with them. And yeah, and I mean, that's a significant block if you want to say we're almost 25 years into the 21st century.
Yes, and I don't think, you know, I think we tend to think of it, you know, as a South African problem, but I don't think it is just a South African problem, that particular issue. There's often a general lack of knowledge of the type of infrastructure, you know, that is actually required to promote digital literacy. And now this is something I'm as we go forward through the series, I want to problematize that, is that, you know, and then that's why the digital native myth also irritates me, is because there's this assumption that everybody has access to these devices and, you know, apps and software and all the rest of it, and, you know, the training and all the stuff that is necessary. There is that aspect to it. I'm glad you brought it up, Shira. Thank you for that, because that is something that we find, particularly in our environment. I mean, even things like load shedding, you know, mitigate against people using their devices. We still do. We have you know, we managed to charge up our devices, and, you know, we muddled through with the load shedding that we had. But these are things that really, you know, it's in a perfect world, we'll all be digital literate, we all have access to device, and these are that was the sort of utopia, I think, to the technological utopia that Mark Brensky was envisioning. But it doesn't always work that way. No, I agree with you. So there's so many facets to this. I mean, I'm just today, this is really in way of introduction to the whole concept, and we can see how many different facets there are to this. And it's actually, you know, one has to take it in little bites, and that's why, you know, I think it's best to move through it the way we are going to move through it in the series, the upcoming series, is looking at it, you know, from very, you know, different points of view, not only in the sense of what the framework presents, but, you know, to look at it and critically analyze it and have a look and see how you can apply it in your own particular context.
Thanks, Fiona, because that, I think, is one of the most practical things we can do
Yes,
especially as a takeaway for this kind of webinar, because it does seem overwhelming.
it
As you were
is.
talking, I was sitting there thinking, our students can't do this, our students don't do that, we don't make opportunities for them to do the other.
I was a bit worried about
And
that,
it
actually,
actually,
sure, that I'm going
yeah.
to be interviewed.
but if we break it down as you're going to, and I'm so
Mm.
grateful that you're giving us your expertise, and thanks for that. At least if everybody leaves with a one thing that they can do
Yes.
by the time they leave the webinar, then I think that's
Yes.
achieving much more digital literacy than saying, well, we've got to do this thing, you know.
Yes, no, it's true. I mean, that's why this, as I say, really is an overview. This is, and I knew it was going to be overwhelming. I had I mean, at times I look at it and I think, how are we going to achieve all of this? Because I
Yeah.
know how much I know about the time constraints, the lack of access to things, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness. And the reality is, I mean, I think before, even let's say 5 or 6 years ago, I won't say it was a nice to have, but the need for it wasn't that urgent. But now that things have developed the way they have with AI and stuff like that, and that need to keep up with things and be able to use these different tools, and there's a growing expectation, particularly in the different industries and professions, that students are able to work proficiently in those. And look, I mean, it's not something, I'm not into the fad side of things of like, oh, AI, we've all got to rush for AI and do things. I mean, I'm really into the sort of criticality and like, hang on. As much as I enjoy working with technology, I do see the downsides and the barriers and things like that. So those are the sort of things that one has to actually look at. But yeah, as I say, I'm overwhelmed. I'm also overwhelmed. I think, how are we going to do this? How will we actually integrate this into the curriculum? I mean, I find it exciting, but at the same time, quite daunting. So it's not that I'm standing here as some sort of expert who has all the answers, and like, well, I'm presenting it, and I'm actually interested in people's feedback in terms of how they see. I mean, as you say, just to take away something from this and just to think about what I've said here. It's not that you've got to suddenly go rushing off into your lecture hall or lab or something like that and immediately start implementing all this stuff. It cannot work like that. It's got to be baby steps, a bit like as the analogy I always like to think of, and in terms of educational technology, and I'm saying this from experience, it's like turning an oil tanker. When you try to turn an oil tanker, you can't just turn. It takes, I don't know how many miles to actually turn a ship like that. Little adjustments, in terms of navigation and steering. They're little adjustments, and that's always the way to approach it, is to take it in small chunks and do what you can where you can. And the more you do it, the more sort of possibilities you will see. The more the definitely more possibilities you'll see in terms of what is possible, and you'll see things that perhaps haven't been seen before. The uses of the technology in ways that, and I'm not talking about some great groundbreaking thing, but particularly in your little area, things that you can use technology for, and the ways that students can use technology, and they will come up with ideas as well eventually. But
yeah,
I mean,
I'm sure they do.
They do, that we don't know about too, probably.
Yeah.
Let's not
So
go down
I'm
that
thinking, we have 7 schools in our faculty, and
Yes.
6 of them have their own teaching and learning subcommittee.
Yes.
Where people report on what's going on and where policy for the school is set and that kind of thing.
Yes.
And I'm thinking maybe it's something that needs to be an agenda point on
Yes.
each one of those teaching and learning committees.
Uh-huh.
Either as a learning moment maybe this is something we need to adopt in our school, or as a reporting vehicle of these are things that we've tried and these things worked and these things didn't work, as more of a funnel towards helping us understand what's actually going on out there.
Yes, I agree.
Because we see the gems, we see the fantastic pearls that people say,
Exactly.
oh, look at this thing I did and it worked, which is great.
Yes.
But then other people feel bad because in their context, they can't actually implement that. And it would be nice to have more of a balanced view of where we are on those things that you set out for us, which is, after all, an international framework.
It is an international framework, and that is the bit of the worry, is that we look. I'm that Jessica's presented this, and I think, yes, in certain respects, particularly the global north, so-called global north, does have a bit of. I'm going to put my head on a block here, but I think they've got a bit of a handle on this. this is a lovely framework, and I think a lot of particularly in the UK, they are working very hard to put these sort of things into place, and there are different standards and things, particularly in terms of teaching and all that sort of stuff that they're interlinked with these. But I don't believe that educational institutions, even in the global north, have got a handle on this. So, that's why I don't think, I should maybe put a slide with "Don't panic." But
yeah,
these are
great addition that.
I maybe should have done that. I don't believe. I mean, knowing I always used to, many years ago, I used to have this idea that people in the US and the UK and Europe and China and places, places where technology is really a thing, in like the East and as well, like India, and but I don't think people have the handle on it that we think they do. So I mean, we're growing with it. Certainly there are certain aspects that we are probably behind in terms of particularly education and things like that, but I think it's a developing framework, as it were, and not everybody's implementing everything. I think they do focus on specific aspects of it, but we'll have a look at that as we go through in the series, as we go forward. Which, speaking of which,
absolutely super.
Yeah, Arshad, can you go one forward, please? I am asking for thoughts, ideas, or comments. You can give them now, or maybe as I think the thoughts and ideas and comments are more likely to come as we go, because I think, as you say, Shira, I think I've bombarded people with a huge amount of information. But I did it in terms of giving an overview. I mean, I have looked at the proficiency and productivity aspects in this particular presentation, but we will go into it a bit more in more detail as we go, because everything is interlinked. All of these abilities, these capabilities are interlinked. So I don't expect everybody to rush and haven't thought on idea or comment. I'm sure you're sort of thinking, as Shira says, feeling a bit mazed.
Yeah, but thank you so much.
So if there's somebody who wants to say something, please feel free. Arshad, if you can go to the next. This is how I see things developing over the next few sessions. Next week, we'll look at the information, data, and media literacies and digital creation, problem solving, and innovation, and look at this in a more active way. How you are currently using these sort of literacy. Well, what you're doing, and I'm not talking about groundbreaking stuff here. I'm just it will be more of a reflective sort of session. I mean, there will be presentation, but what I would like to do in this series is get the feedback from you, reflections on what you're actually doing currently. There is no right or wrong answer here. I'm not looking for you, as I say, to come out with something spectacular. Even if you're using this in small ways and thinking about how you can go, take it further within your particular context, and what sort of challenges you're having. And particularly, I think it's good to look at the challenges. This is not, as I say, it's not some sort of perfect, environment or situation. We know this. We know we don't have a perfect environment or situation. So I'm going to enjoy, looking at all of these different challenges, the benefits, and so forth. But particularly, I want you to think about it within your particular context. And as we go forward, as I say, contextualize all of these things that I'm presenting and give some thought as to how they're already happening, because believe me, they are already happening, even if it's in a small way in your areas. The things even that I've looked at today, that what we've regarded as have come to regard as computer literacy, but which they've divided into proficiency and productivity and all those different aspects. Just give that a bit of thought before we, going forward in the series as we go forward. And then on the next one, 2 weeks from now, we'll look at the digital communication, collaboration, and participation. Then go on to digital identity, well-being, and digital learning and development, which are very much interlinked. And then finally, what I'll do on the last session is look at prompt engineering, AI literacy, and particularly in terms of prompt engineering and the critical thinking that needs to go into, because I think prompt engineering is ripe for the educational environment. It's something that I think we could really put to good use in the educational environment to get students into the mode of critical thinking. Right, so I think that's it from my side. Is there anything you want to add, Shira?
No, thank you, Fiona. I think you've done a great job. There really, really, really is a lot to think about. And thanks also for giving us a schedule of what we're going to be talking about when we will advertise when everybody comes back from their winter research endeavors. I'm sure that people will choose specific things that they really, really want to get involved in. And maybe then you'll also get some direct feedback.
Yes.
So we really appreciate your time, and we're looking forward to the next couple of weeks. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Cheers, everybody. Enjoy the week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.